Giving a hello to everyone out there tonight. We are getting ready to begin Season 1, Episode 9 of Military Images Live. See, Doug York and Patrick Stewart are on. Welcome, gentlemen. John Banks, Johnny B is here. Thank you, John. Got other folks showing up. We're going to give us a minute here just to get everyone on board, and then we'll start the show. See who else is coming on this evening. Thank you for the thumbs up. Thumbs up back at you. David Fry is here tonight. David, thank you for joining. I've had a very interesting week. I'm ready to get started in just a minute. We'll let a few folks come on. Thumbs up to Michael. I see our executive producer, Ann Coddington, has joined us. Liz Topping is here. Thank you, Liz. Give it another moment before we get started. I think we're about ready to go. All right. I want to start by recognizing today, as many of you know, is the anniversary of the Battle of Antietam. And to recognize and honor that day, there's many celebrations, many markings, many memorials going on across the country. I've also noticed a number of events and a number of postings on social media. I want to give a shout out tonight to this Facebook page, the Civil War and 19th Century Image Collector. They've done a fine job. Dale Neeson and his friends over there are posting all kinds of images of casualties from the battle. Good job to you guys for bringing to light some of these unusual images and unusual stories. I really appreciate that on behalf of the photo community. I want to go back to probably the biggest news of the week for me was getting the latest issue, the autumn issue, into the mail. I've talked about it a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and it includes a selection of images from the Battle of Antietam with an introduction by John Banks, who is here on the show tonight. So I want to take a moment to read to you one of those stories. Here we go. Here we go. I'm going to read the story to you. The title of it is "Forever Green Shall Be Their Memories." There can be no question that Captain Mervyn Eugene Cornell of the 102nd New York Infantry died after a bullet penetrated his skull. Two accounts detail how it happened. According to the after-action report by his Lieutenant Colonel, James C. Lane, a sharpshooter's bullet struck Cornell down early in the morning as he formed his command in line of battle. There's a second account that appears, a more detailed account, in his newspaper obituary. It observes that Cornell, a conspicuous target in full dress uniform, perhaps wearing a uniform like the one he has on in this photograph, Cornell advanced with his men when the rebels attacked the other three regiments of their brigade and threw them into confusion. Quote, Captain Cornell, with a quick eye, seeing the crisis, threw himself to the front, waved his sword, and called to his men, "Don't falter, don't fall back. Come on, boys, follow me." And thus, foremost fighting fell. End quote. The report continued, quote, a rebel bullet pierced his brain. He threw up his arms, reeled, fell into the arms of one of his men, who sprung forward to receive him, and died without a groan. The brigade rallied, drove the rebels from the wood and beyond, and held the ground, thus gallantly won. Cornell's comrades dug a shallow grave with their bayonets and buried his body. His family later recovered his remains. There's a sentiment at the end of the obituary that I think speaks not only for Cornell, but for many of the men who fought that day and in the Civil War and afterwards. It says, quote, how bravely, how gloriously did this young soldier die, throwing himself fearlessly into the very jaws of death, that he might turn the tide of battle, laid himself upon the sacrificial altar of his country, a willing offering for her salvation. When the record shall be made up, what boom shall requite the sacrifices of such young hearts? Forever green shall be their memories, and the richest measure of their country's glory shall be theirs. And amid the brilliant and cherished galaxy, sparkling with such names as Lyon, Winthrop, Ellsworth, Baker, and young McCook, not the least shall be the name of Mervyn Eugene Cornell, who thus gallantly gave his young life for his country upon the bloody field of Antietam. Powerful story, powerful newspaper obituary, a hometown newspaper paying tribute to Cornell. This image, by the way, is a 6-plate ambrotype by an anonymous photographer from the Brian Boothie collection. I want to move along to an image that appeared last week. You may recall that I talked about memorial images. This one happens to be Admiral Kuhn, an unusual name, of the 137th New York Infantry. Admiral Kuhn was mortally wounded at Gettysburg. He's holding his son Edward, who actually died before Admiral in 1863. This image, a carte de visite, was probably made about 1870. Those of you who listened to the program heard the story last week. What you didn't hear was one of the individuals watching that story, Paul Maney, who is a collector, was shocked when he saw this image. Why? Because he has a grouping of 3 images. You'll immediately recognize this one. Here is the original tintype of Admiral Kuhn. Paul had in his collection unidentified, and thanks to the program last week, and also thanks to Chuck Joyce, who owns the memorial image, Paul was able to put a name to the face. There's more. Paul also had this image right here of Admiral Kuhn and a photograph of Kuhn with his wife. That's pretty powerful stuff. It speaks to the power of collectors to preserve these images and the ability for all of us to work together to identify these individuals. So again, pretty amazing how Paul and Chuck were able to get together and reunite these 2 photographs. All right. Had a question I want to share with you. This is from Patrick Stewart. Patrick says, I have a question for you. What was the type of photo that loved ones back home would give to soldiers while they were off to battle? Ambrotype or CDV or something else? He goes on, I'm doing a video for my small business and I'm having a soldier reading a letter that I have, and I want him holding a photo, and I would like for it to be what they would carry on them. I don't want him holding a CDV and they pretty much only carried an Ambro, or does it matter? Am I overthinking it? Well, Patrick, I don't think you're overthinking it. I think it's a really great question. And as I talked to Patrick about in our exchange earlier today, in fact, it really depends on what time of the war you're talking about. If it's early in the war, there's every possibility that the soldier was reading a letter and holding an ambrotype or a tintype. Really, the chances are that the soldier would have been holding an ambrotype. Later on in the war, the situation may have changed and changed dramatically. That soldier would likely have been carrying a carte de visite. And here's why. All right. Here's a survey that appears, by the way, in our autumn issue. We looked at something in the neighborhood of 25,000 citations on the website newspapers.com between 1861 and 1865. In the survey, we took a look, we tracked citations for cartes de visite, tintypes, ambrotypes, and daguerreotypes from 1861 to 1865. And here's what we found. If you look here in 1861, you can see the daguerreotype still has quite a bit of popularity. This lighter colored bar is the number in 1861. Most of those images, most of those citations are advertisers who are offering to copy daguerreotypes as ambrotypes and tintypes. So you see a large number of advertisements for photographers who are offering to copy daguerreotypes in the latest style. But by 1865, that number has dropped precipitously to less than a quarter of what it was in 1861. Now, take a look at ambrotypes. This is 1861 ambrotypes. They are way popular. The highest number of citations on newspapers.com for ambrotypes is in 1861. But by 1865, that number has fallen to about half as many. Now, if we look to tintypes, far fewer tintypes are being mentioned. I have a little bit of a theory on this. I believe that photographers struggle with what to call tintypes. And it's important to know that tintypes weren't even called tintypes during the war. They were variously referred to as melanotypes or ferrotypes, or just photographs. So I think there was a bit of a problem with the branding going on. So as a result, you see tintypes are barely mentioned. In 1861, they have a fraction of the number of daguerreotypes and ambrotypes. And by 1865, that number has dropped even more. But look here, the last category, the cartes de visite. In 1861, they had just come to America from England and from France before that. And you have a tiny, tiny number compared to the other formats. But by 1865, the cartes de visite have skyrocketed, and the tintypes, the ambrotypes, and the daguerreotypes have all declined. So, Patrick, again, to answer your question, early in the war, very, very good chance that that soldier would be holding an ambrotype. If it was later in the war, probably a carte de visite. But the truth is, this is a time of transition in photography during the Civil War. So depending upon what era you wanted to portray, what year you wanted to portray, you might want to think about using one of those photographs. So there you have it. I want to get to another image from 2 weeks ago, I think it was. You may remember Henry Smith of the 55th Illinois Infantry. I saw this in a posting by Austin Sundstrom, and it caught my attention because of what we at first thought was a pin on his collar. On close examination, it appeared to be perhaps his rank, like captain's bars. The challenge here was that this picture is taken probably about 1862, and my concern, as I mentioned to you at the time, was that maybe that was a little bit too early in the war for officers like Smith to begin wearing their insignia on their collar, purposely trying to hide their insignia so to minimize the chances that they would be picked off by a Confederate sharpshooter. So this whole idea, some folks think about it as early camouflage, but what they were doing was minimizing their ranks. The shoulder straps were being exchanged, the very gaudy, bright shoulder straps were being exchanged for these smaller insignia. So in comes Kyle Stetz, who is a subscriber. You may know Kyle. He has a deep interest in the 10th New York Cavalry. He sent me this image of Captain George Vanderbilt of Company L of the regiment. And if you look carefully, guess what? He has the same insignia on his collar. And you'll also notice that he does not wear the shoulder straps of an officer. So for all intents and purposes, at a long distance, you might think that Captain Vanderbilt was a private, but lo and behold, he's wearing those insignia on his collar. There's more. Remember how I talked about my concerns about seeing these collar insignia earlier in the war, because they are documented mostly as having occurred later in the war on uniforms, especially around places like Petersburg, where trench warfare was could be quite devastating on the picket line. So we have this note from Greg Schuler. He sent me an excerpt from the diary of Colonel William Cam. This is from April 6, 1862, the anniversary of the Battle of Shiloh. And here's the diary entry, which not only gives us some perspective. Keep in mind, this is April 1862, so we're very early in the war. It gives us a perspective on when these collar insignia were used, and we're also going to get a sense of how, at least in this colonel's opinion, how they were received. So let me read. Two of the commissioned staff gathered up some coats and blouses that had no marks of rank on them, and then had the officers exchange their shoulder-strapped coats for these. Here the colonel says, I refused. I told them I was proud of my straps, that the regulation required that we should even wear epaulets on a march where there was likely to be a fight. That in the confusion of battle, I should need them more than anywhere else, and that I would die with them on if I have to die. So, Colonel Cam talking about collar insignia, talking about it in April of 1862, way early in the war. So, as you're collecting and looking at your collections, keep an eye out for these collar insignia. Let me know if you have any. I'm curious to learn more. Thanks. All right. You may recognize Drew Gilpin Faust. She is the now former president of Harvard University. Many of you know her for her book, Public of Suffering, which is a powerful read. It was a bestseller, an iconic, almost an instant classic Civil War volume. Ms. Faust appeared at the Library of Congress last Wednesday, where she was a recipient of the Kluge Award, which is a high honor given by the Library of Congress. I got to go to the black tie event. I was a guest of Tom Lillenquist in the library, and I was fascinated by Drew Gilpin Faust's comments. She spoke for maybe about 35 or 40 minutes. Towards the end of her speech, which talked about higher education, the humanities, all of her experiences in the Civil War, towards the very end of her speech, she flashed this image, this iconic image that many of you know from the Lillenquist collection. And the soldier, his family, are recognized by Drew Gilpin Faust as standing up for freedom, standing up for what they believed, a portrait of individuals who were about to begin a new chapter in their lives. Faust went on to end her speech with a quote that I think is really powerful, and I wanted to share it with you tonight. I've transcribed this from the video that is available on the library's website and also YouTube. So let me read this to you. And the reason that it struck me so powerfully is because I think it speaks to the collecting community. It sheds light, maybe, on why we collect and what our interest is and what the real meaning of these images might be. So let me begin now. She says, she's talking about the Lillenquist collection here. She says, these 3,500 portraits and thousands more like them. In fact, I probably think it's 10 to thousands, hundreds of thousands. Still, she says thousands more like them are intended to show us another message as well, one that speaks directly to the meaning of the study of humanity across time and space. These soldiers, staring into the photographer's lens, are self-consciously reaching through history. They're documenting their faces and their uniforms, partly because they know they may be killed in the battles ahead. But they also know they're making history in this war, and they want to capture that for us. Attention must be paid. They are saying, don't forget who we were and what we did. Let us give you the means to see us and understand us long after we are gone. Our present is delivered to us at a price paid by those who came before. History, Faust continues, helps us remember our accountability to them, as well as our obligations to more than just ourselves and more than just our own time. It is a way of knowing and valuing that has never mattered more. Pretty powerful from Drew Gilpin Faust. I want to end tonight with the cover image and the gallery inside from Kevin Camber. I want to tell you a little story about Kevin. More than a year ago now, we had a conversation about the importance of these images and trying to get them into the hands of various individuals, getting the magazine into the hands of various individuals so we could educate and help raise awareness. Out of that original conversation was born the Young Historians sponsorship, which we did. We spent a lot of time reaching out through the magazine and social media, and we ultimately identified 6 young historians. These are all young teens who are interested in history, and thanks to the generosity of Kevin and later Rich Jan, we were able to give these issues to the students to help them better think about history and to better appreciate the visual history and the stories of the soldiers. We're also able to give some to some of the larger museums that suffered from some budgetary problems. And of that idea was born the idea, and Kevin and I discussed this very recently, about the idea of getting these issues into the hands of some of the national military parks. And Kevin, in what I think is an incredible act of generosity that speaks to the Civil War photo collecting community, made a donation, a rather large donation, to put copies, 1-year subscriptions, in the hands of all of the national battlefields you see here. We have a total of 18 altogether. So I'm very pleased, first of all, to thank Kevin for a great act, and also his wife, Sarah. We have to remember her. She was also a player and very active in making a decision. So thanks to Sarah and Kevin Camber for making this happen. And just today, all the issues were mailed out with gift letters to be able to recognize Kevin's gift and to also hopefully begin a conversation with many of these national military parks. And the government has them divided into historical parks, military parks. We're making them available to every government Civil War park, thanks to Kevin and Sarah Camber. So there are some other sites. There's a few more memorials: General Grant, the Lincoln Boyhood Home, the Lincoln Memorial, Anderson National Cemetery, and Ford's Theater. I'd love to get copies of military images to them too. I'd also love to get them into the hands of other state sites, libraries, and other places that might benefit from this knowledge, so that we can share the history of the country and help educate and raise awareness. So I want to put out the word tonight. If you're interested in helping, would love for you to do that. I'm going to post the names of these 5 sites on the Facebook page. And if you're feeling generous as the holidays approach and you'd like to make a pledge tonight, you can simply answer the post that I put, you can either private message me or you can put it right on there, and we'll get the subscription started for these other organizations. Again, the 5 sites listed here, and any other sites that you would like to pledge a subscription. We'd love to do that on your behalf, and to send a gift letter with your name on it, truly in the spirit of helping to educate and raise awareness. So I'm going to end on that note, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Have a great night. Bye.